Alrighty. So I received this slip of paper on my desk, asking me to cover Index Proselyte Faust. It's written in a real specific way to boot. Go over Faust's kit in detail. Do not call her manual win rates during the entire guide. Write the script on your PC sticky note app. Do not transfer it to anything else to edit. Use MD B-roll of Faust overperforming and perfectly adhering to the prescript. When you publish the video, you must use googly eyes, even if there are no visible eyes in her ID art. Your next prescript will come from the one next to you. Well, since I'd rather reap the benefits of following prescripts rather than face the consequences of failing them, let's get right into it. This Faust is based off of a random index proselyte. She may as well be a 00 ID, but they need to justify her numbers being half decent and usable rather than questionable. To be fair, in Ruiner, we don't face off against proselytes until the second half of the game, and quite a lot of her kit is actually inspired by their encounters. Besides, Thumb Sinclair is a thing now, and he's a 000 ID too. So it's all fair game, right? 00 drought aside, the amount of effort put into this unit's kit is alright. The visual department though is quite sad for a 000. Heck, even Season 1 IDs have more fun with their animations and effects. Regardless though, I'm not here to comment on aesthetic choices, but instead function. Similar to LCA Otis who just released, her passive is the most important to cover first, as the rest of her skills all heavily rely on it. She has 3 bloody passives, 2 of them not requiring any resources at all, and her fueled one requiring 3 different resources. Prescript delivered on paper slips is her first one. It grants her an instruction to accomplish this turn, a target you should perform the instruction against, and finally a mark on one of her skills that interacts with the instructions. These prescripts come in increasingly difficult order, but only the first 3 actually matter. First one requires her to use a skill that's been marked, or hits with a skill that's been marked. Using a skill means activating it in any shape or form, so she could lose a clash and still be successful in using the skill. The second one removes the first part. You must now hit with a skill that has been marked. The third one requires her to use an S3 that's been marked or an Ego Awakening skill. This one is potentially the most troublesome if you've arrived here too fast for various reasons. Your skill buckets may have not lined up a skill free, or otherwise forced you to use the skill free earlier. Else you don't have enough resources or any Ego Awakenings whatsoever to bail you out of such. When this prescript does come up though, it will always mark an S3 if available. Regardless if she's staggered, immobilized, in panic, or Ego Corrosion, the prescript doesn't check for success or failure to meet its conditions. Speaking of which, the payoff for colluding with these instructions is her second passive, alongside the penalties for failing the instructions. First off, if you succeed in performing the prescript, you get a bump in sanity and 1 grace of the prescript, once per turn. This is a buff that grants an offense level for every 3 in the stack, giving her up to 3 extra offense level. Coupled with some other bonuses we'll get to later and her base numbers, she's actually quite a good clasher thanks to this. Anyhow, if the target Faust executed her prescript against also has the prescript's target, she gets 3 grace and double the bump in SP. This means so long as we get through all 3 conditionals back to back for 3 turns, you'll pretty much be at maximum grace of the prescript by the start of turn 4. As for failing prescripts, we get a debuff called Karmic Consequence. This can stack to 100, and it gives defense down for every 10 and a fragile for every 20. It's some pretty nasty stuff if you even let it stack up to 20, as a fragile plus 2 defense downs is already 16% extra damage being taken. For each failed prescript, we stack up 5 at a time. Why they feel the need to balloon out the math is beyond me, but that's neither here nor there. I reckon at most you can fail 3 before things start getting a little dicey. Now if she's made an honest attempt to fulfill the prescript but the target could not be interacted with, we're granted the mercy of no karmic consequence. Anyhow, her third passive is Proselyte's Blade. It requires 1 of Sloth, Pride, and Gloom to activate. Real funky stuff. She deals more damage with marked skills per grace, at 9 giving 20%, which is surprisingly a lot. When we hit enemies that are the prescript's target, we also gain more poise and deal some more sinking to boot. The number of times this effect can trigger actually goes up depending on our grace too, going up to 3. At 9 grace, we get a further stim in this regard to boot. each part inflicting more sinking potency and gaining more poise. Overall, in passives alone, this is rather solid. Do a few instructions and you'll be given some pretty nice benefits. Overlay that onto the rest of her skills and they're a fair bit more hefty than they may originally seem, since each part gets bumped up quite significantly. Hang on one sec though, I've been given a new prescripts from the one next to me. Take the third pack from a bag of Indomie. Cook it to package instructions but leave out the chili. Fry an egg sunny side up and slide it on top. Serve it to the person who gave you this prescript. Sorry, guide is on hold for a sec. Strange, normally you only get a new prescript once the previous one has been done, but the grace of the prescript is what matters here, right? One sec, that should be the right packet. Who leaves out the chili anyway? Isn't this like one of the main parts of the triple sauce? Never mind, better to not question the paper slips. This looks solid enough though. Should do the job. Right, the rest of Faust's kit. Her skill 1 gains 1 clash power and deals 20% more damage if marked for the prescript. It otherwise gives us dual status options. 2 poise counts and a poise potency while inflicting sinking on hits, more sinking on crits. It also has dual status based coin conditionals with a magic number of 12 between both sinking and poise for maximum effect. Not bad at all really. With the grace benefits and attacking the prescript's targets, we actually get quite a lot of returns in multipliers to boot. As long as we follow instructions, this is actually quite strong. The skill 2 is rather similar, but with much higher status numbers and an extra coin. The mark of the prescript in this case only gives a final power rather than clash power and a damage boost. Nonetheless, it does contribute to damage. We get a lot more poise counts and potency. This time we even get sinking count if we crit. Not that it's enough to make her anywhere near positive. Regardless, this skill also has a magic number of 12 between the 2 statuses and is otherwise a beat stick. As for the skill 3, when marked, we get 30% critical damage alongside a final power, meaning this one mainly pays off once our poise has stabilized. Again, here we have the magic number of 12 for status-based coin conditionals, as well as grace of the prescript conditionals. At 6, this thing becomes unbreakable and deals 30% more damage. Pretty solid for following instructions up until now. We gain poise counts to boots and poise potency based on grace. Aside from that, more poise and sinking application in the first 2 coins, followed by a big hit on the 3rd coin provided we have the grace. At 9 grace, this is 60% extra damage alongside some sinking count if we crit. This means that on a crit, so long as this skill is marked and we're hitting the target marked by the prescript, this 1 coin has a 120% multiplier, not including poise, crit damage, and offense level shenanigans. Essentially, this thing hits surprisingly hard due to the weight of multipliers we've got here. If everything lines up, this is a surprisingly high amount of damage for not so flashy a unit. Last, we're looking at a defensive skill. For a normal counter, it actually has quite a lot going for it. 3 coins and conditionals based on grace of the prescript. It can hit surprisingly hard and gives us a barrier to boots. However, the barrier is lowered for every 5 karmic consequence. If you somehow ignore the prescript for too long and get 50 karmic consequence, you get none. Regardless, pretty cool defense skill that isn't a clashable. However, for the status brained among you, you may notice that her count is a little pathetic. For sinking, she barely goes neutral, meaning throwing her in a status that has trouble with count wouldn't really give her a home. Whereas for poise, due to her coins being more than her count generation, she may have a hard time maintaining higher stacks of it once she reaches higher potency levels. Essentially with poise, we'd have to gamble that she doesn't crit too much while it's building up, in order for it to stack high enough for it to not matter. With the inherent decay in poise though, this may be troublesome. That is not to say that we don't have solutions for these, just that we really can get thrown off by RNG quite hard. As for how I would build a team around her, since we already did sinking for Otis, let's look at the poise angle for Faust. More specifically, poise, pierce, and assist attacks. Since this Faust is quite an easy to plug and play sinner, I reckon we can get away with a little spice this time. Thus, let's pull together the culmination of a lot of my past videos' team ideas into one, with Faust as a rather okay member that we can just slot in. But first, another prescript. Okay, Pick up your cat, turn her 45 degrees, and feed her some treats on the 4th level of a cat tree. This must be done before she starts distorting. Give me a moment here, I'll be right back. Say hello to Rills. This is my cat. She's a ball of violence and cares little for anything besides food and pets. So I've just got to pick her up, turn 45 degrees, place her on the 4th level of a cat tree, and there we go, she has some treats. Really odd. Perhaps the first prescript is supposed to last longer than the other two. Nonetheless, let me introduce you to the first package of choice, the Full Stop Boys. Hongers is a very self-sufficient and powerful damage dealer that can call on Heathcliff for assist attacks. He also shares Force Sin affinities, meaning he can help get her passive online. The spread of Gloom, Sloth, and Pride is quite useful, as we will be factoring those in specifically for Resonance and Forced Egos. Thorcalgia especially needs this specific spread to be thrown out. As for Heathcliff, his combos with Hongers go a long way in generating more ego resources to use, as well as outputting some ridiculous damage. While the additional Pierce Fragility isn't going to be the most useful for Faust, we're getting plenty of damage with these boys. As for Egos, Hongers can spam Thunderer if he needs to cash out his poise more, and with enough time, can also pull out Tears of Tarnished Blood, although that one will eventually get him killed. We'll also put a footnote in Cavernous Wailing for later. As for Heathcliff, we're eventually going to get mileage out of Asymmetrical once we get to a certain Stabby Boy. Binds will also be quite nice to have, though it'll be a significantly lower priority. From there, we want to look at the Drifting Blade of Hongyun, Ryoshu. She's very easy to throw into this composition for more ego resources. The Gluttony lets us get off Rep Emitter if we need a cheaper option for the prescript, but also she adds Pride and plenty of Gloom to make use of. We can also choose between running her in backup to start, or on the field depending on whether or not we'd like to have someone sub in once Heathcliff needs to go. Aside from that, she's here to stab things often and add to everyone's offense as required. Ego-wise, we absolutely want to abuse Thorcalgia. We need the extra poise generation to help out with force count issues. Now, if we can ever get off a Contempt Ore, that'll go a long way as well, though the resources required to get it off are rather scarce here, so consider it as a Superbia target instead if required to turbo out our resource gains. Our next fellow to add is Captain Ishmael. While the resonance isn't all too perfect or stable, we're mostly looking at her assist attack this time around. There's enough Pride and Gloom to go around thus far, so being able to line those up isn't all too bad as required. That being said, forced adherence to the prescript may get in the way from time to time. We'll need to be careful in regards to when we activate her S3 and her S2. The S1 is pretty much fodder for off turns this time around. We're going to want to line up enough resonance for her S3 to hit Faust and supplement her counts whenever we're able to pull it off. This should help alleviate some of the count issues, but not all of them necessarily. The S2 may land quite often on Faust due to her not having any haste inbuilt compared to a lot of the others we're planning to field. In terms of egos, we're pretty much only looking at Blind Obsession. If the poise count rolls onto her, we're solid. Otherwise, so long as we get the damage up, we're still getting some returns anyway. Now, if we want to benefit from its passive for more offense level, we're going to be looking to use Force Counter a few times. Since it does generate shielding, we'd have to do it earlier rather than later. So keep that in mind if you want to make Faust into the team's best clasher. Finally, on the assist attack agenda is Night Owl's Gregor. It provides some much needed sources of lust, as well as having both Sloth and Pride to provision us more resonance support. Aside from that, his main appeal is going to be Merche. Pretty much he exists for more attacks and execution damage. His status application isn't going to help us all too much outside of one very specific case. That case being when we need to cash out egos. If for some reason or another Faust can afford to use Everlasting even once, we basically solve the tremor application of this entire team. Suddenly Gregor turns on in full, and we're not only going to be getting pierce damage out of him, we can go even further, using Cavernous Wailing and his own Unbrilliant Glory. Even further than those two would be Asymmetrical Inertia to give Tremor Burst a sudden surge in usefulness. Anyhow, since he'd be the only user of the Tremor, it's not the most useful. Just keep the tech possibilities in mind for when they're needed. After all, we have all the sinners with godly Tremor egos with us. Regardless, he's the last part of the assist attack agenda. Next, we're looking at Sinclair, Mr. John Pierce. Very self-sufficient boy that can provide us some fragile and clash really damn well. He's also really fast, so if Faust ever needs to go unopposed in order to stack up Grace to the prescript, we can make use of him to redirect a clash for her with ease. Nonetheless, man is very plug and play alongside being useful in a rather vanilla way, as another good clasher. There's no egos to be concerned with here, just good old high-powered Sinclair ID. Alright, he does also give us Gluttony through his S1, more fodder for the rep emitter. Last fella that may hit the field is Sync Assault. While we're getting nothing out of his Rupture application, his numbers and poise aren't bad at all to consider. Couple that with a reuse on his S3 and honestly, he's such an overlooked unit thanks to the Hay shows. If we leave him in the wings, he'll be giving our Sinners haste through his support passive at first, with an easy to apply free Pride Resonance. Once he hits the field though, he'll have some catching up to do in terms of poise, unless we field him in place of the Drifting Blade to start. In terms of egos, the man has plenty to make use of. Chains of Others is the premier boss killer, Regret turns him into a monster, especially with his easy conditionals, Pursuance gives us healing, protection, and more power to the fella, and finally, we could use Crushbound Past if we want to cash out on Tremor even more. Since all the on-field fellas are out of the way, we can look at our bench warmers. There's one jank one here, but the rest make more than enough sense. First is BL Sung. He gives poise count to the most sane among the Sinners. Since Faust will almost always guarantee herself as the most sane thanks to the prescript SP gain, she is getting a massive poise count boost. Rather, this combined with the other sources of poise count all but guarantee that she'll never be running out. Next we're looking at BL Don. We're spreading around the poise potency from the back line to help all of our Sinners with generation problems. Since the two full stop boys generate it quite fast, there is a better chance of Faust also benefiting here as required. Past the poise supports, we've got BL Otis. He's here for the execution damage bonuses. If ever there's a time where Faust isn't the most sane anymore, this can fall on Ishmael for her S3 or Gregor for his Merche. Regardless, everyone can make use of a generic damage boost once we start damage racing. Last is LCCB Assistant Manager Rodya. As I expected with the new Canto, a lot more enemies are throwing defense skills at us. This scales her passive's usefulness up quite significantly, and 5 Envy looks quite expensive to fuel, but with full stop Heathcliff's assist attacks, we're going to have no problems getting there. In most cases, this buff will go to Real Shu, but as the damage spreads around and Unbreakables are tanked, Faust may get a turn with it as well. Anyhow, we can move on to play patterns, now that all of the Sinners have been covered. First, deployment mostly matters for support passives. As most of them regard the most sane among your Sinners, this will most often be Faust. Having her in the first slot guarantees her getting these passives at all times. On the other hand, if you want Gregor or Ishmael to get Otis's double tap, you can place one of them here instead. From there, we'll want full stop Heathcliff, followed by full stop Honglu. These two are mostly slot-conscious choices, since if we end up in unfocused encounters, they'll be granted slots earlier, allowing Heathcliff to dump more rounds faster, and Honglu to take advantage of the extra slots once Heathcliff has to leave. The substituting in Ryoshu or Mersault will benefit from the extra slots too. From there, the remaining lot can functionally be slapped in any order. On every turn, we're going to want to do our best to adhere to the prescripts with some odd caveats. We're going to want to make sure we hit our target with the marked skill for the first 2 turns if at all possible. Once we're at 6 prescript, we'll need to ego or use an S3, bus. Turn 1 should be very straightforward, since we only have to use the skill on the correct target. Regardless of what it is, the rest of the team will be building up towards passives to help us along. Specifically, we're going to need a Pride, Sloth, and Gloom skill to get Faust's passive active. Past there, we're aiming to get as much Pride as possible to start fueling the more expensive passives. Getting at least 3 through will activate quite a lot of passives all at once. Heathcliff, Ishmael, and Mersault are resonance based. 3 activates them all. Blade Lineage, Yi Sung, and Don activate theirs on 3 Pride resources. Otis on 4, and Hongers alongside Sinclair are on 5. Essentially, if we can get a Sloth, Gloom, and 5 Pride, a majority of the passives are already settled. How we approach turn 2 and 3 all depend on Faust, however. Assuming Faust was able to get free Grace on turn 1, we'd then look to see if we have an S3 in our skill bucket. If it's the currently marked one, or one we've already used, or if there isn't any upcoming, we'll need to pull together enough resources to use an ego on turn 3. For this, look at what ego you'd like to make use of and plan accordingly. At this stage, you would mostly be looking at Thorcalgia and representation emitter. Rep emitter is a little cheaper on pride, but requires gluttony. So unless you're able to get 2 gluttony on turn 2, we'll mostly be looking at Thorcalgia instead. This one costs an extra pride, gloom, and sloth. While they're all easy resources to get, we may end up turning off a lot of passives by using them. At worst, I reckon we'd need 8 pride, 2 gloom, and 2 sloth in order to not turn off all our important passives. Now if you took fluid sac instead, we'd have to prepare for it from turn 1 to even make use of it here. Otherwise we would likely be shit out of luck, since the resources are a tad harder to get, especially in needing 2 lust and 3 envy, which aren't as easy to come by compared to the other free resources for Thorcalgia. Nonetheless, once the resources are lined up for an ego, or an S3 is within reach, ensure that Faust is hitting her target and we can proceed to turn 3. On turn 3 we dump False Ego and make up for any resources we may be missing. If Ryoshu is on or bound for the field, consider stacking resources for her Thorcalgia as well. From there, most engines should be on and most of our units should be hitting their stride. There's no real loop or rotation beyond here, except clashing good, fishing for crits, and maybe doing some tremor-based acrobatics with the egos we have equipped. Regardless, that should more or less conclude the guide, though there's one more prescript to be had here. Take these specific directions to this bubble tea store. Order grapefruit bubble tea with lychee jelly, half ice and half sugar. Buy one for yourself as well. Make sure you use your own card to do so. Give the items to the individual who gave you this prescript. Okay, these are getting real specific. Sure, I guess. It doesn't seem that far from here. While I'm doing that, let's discuss some specifics with Faust. The prescript's targets, despite visually appearing on an entire abnormality, actually only applies to a single body part. This means in order to get to the free grace stacks, we'll want to check exactly where the mark falls on. In terms of egos to use for the third prescript, we'll want to prioritize Thorcalgia over Everlasting over Rep Emitter. Each of these are all exceedingly useful to pull off. When using an ego to fulfill the last part, we don't have to worry about whether or not the slot is marked. But we do have to make sure that the ego does hit the prescript target. Otherwise, we'll only build up a single grace, which can severely hamper us in that we may need to hit an ego multiple times, or pray for an S3 to hit with. We can circumvent this with a higher attack weight ego like Rep Emitter, or Thorcalgia instead of making use of Everlasting. Otherwise, if you believe that we don't need False Thorcalgia, that the rest of the poise generation crutches we have are enough, we can consider Fluid Sac instead, and that'll pretty much guarantee hitting the correct targets for the third prescript. All in all though, Index Proselyte Faust is a pretty fantastic unit that's good at clashing and dealing out a pretty sizable amount of damage. As long as you play Simon Says for a few turns, the payoffs are quite nice in consistency, and allowing her to punch harder than you'd expect. Okay, that should be all of my prescripts done, so...
Now it's time for another vendetta. Going through the shelves, picking out my pre-written persona. Children of the city sees only the neon stars reflected upon the murky gutter skies. Don't ask me why, I desperately wish to be included in the city's night.
Thanks for watching another video. I hope most of this guide isn't just thrown out the window when whatever censored monstrosity of a Don comes out, but that's for the me of tomorrow to worry about. Speaking of tomorrow, I'll be streaming Canto 9 Part 2 the moment it comes out, so if you can tune in, that'd be appreciated. Aside from that, please like and subscribe if you like the content and would like to see more like this in the future. Whether or not it'll feature jank prescript stuff like this one, I can't say, but I'll try to keep it reasonably entertaining. The community Discord is still open. While it isn't crazy active, it does come alive anytime new content for Limbus releases. There's also a tracker of this year's mistakes sitting in there as well as some other doodads. Last, thank you so much to Critical Kresnik for being the first super thanks on this channel. It means a lot in helping to keep the lights on.